Everyone, we're now live. You may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelica. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nikki Reed, and I serve as the Community and Economic Development Director for the City of Asheville. We'd like to welcome you to our meeting around the permanent supportive housing proposal for the Ramada Inn at Riverford Parkway. We thank you so much for joining us here, and we look forward to our conversation tonight. Our program will be in two parts. We will begin with a presentation and have our speakers present information that we prepared in advance. And then at the latter half of the meeting, we will open it up for questions. And I know we've also been emailed some questions, so we will have our rest of our time this afternoon to answer those questions. And so first, what I'd like to do is do a quick round of introductions so that the folks that you see on this screen, you know. So again, my name is Nikki Reed and I'm a City of Asheville employee. And so next I'll ask our city staffers to introduce themselves. Deborah, let's begin with you.
Absolutely. Good evening. My name is Deborah Campbell and I serve in the role as your city manager. Angelica?
Good evening. My name is Angelica Driver. I am the Business Services Administrator for the city's Community and Economic Development Department.
My name is Ashley Traynham Carson. I'm the Communication Specialist for Community Economic Development. And for the callers who are on the line now, if you wish to get into the speaker queue, please hit *3 and I'll facilitate those calls later in our production.
I'm Emily Ball. I'm also in the Community and Economic Development Department here at the City of Asheville, specifically working on homelessness.
And I'm Brian Husky, and I work alongside Emily Ball in the Community Development Office at the City of Asheville as the city's homelessness lead.
Excellent. And so now, Todd, if you want to take the lead on introducing Step Up.
Sure. I'm Todd Lipka, and I am the president and CEO for Step Up.
And I'm, I am Aaron Criswell. I'm the Chief Housing Development Officer for Step Up. I oversee our permanent supportive housing developments, our asset management and property management functions.
Fantastic. Thank you all. So I think we're ready to begin. Deborah, if you want to make some opening remarks, and then I'll share my screen and we can start the presentation.
Absolutely. So thank you all again for joining us. And let me start with actually an apology. We know that we did not give a lot of time to attend this meeting, but we are in a bit of a crunch in terms of a timeline. And when Nikki makes a presentation, hopefully this will become more evident in terms of the time constraints that we are under. But again, welcome. Thank you all for joining us, for those who were able to join us. And so my staff knows that I like to begin with the end in mind. So at the end of this meeting, I hope that number one, we will share critical and vital information about a wonderful, and I say that unapologetically, opportunity that we have in working with a group that can create permanent supportive housing. But I also want to remind the community that there's still another need for an emergency shelter, and we are not, as a community, giving up on that. We are stepping back a little bit, doing a little bit more planning, and working with our other community partners. And we hope that this can be a collective win for our community, that we will accomplish both things. So at the end of this meeting, we hope that we will bring clarity to what our goals are, what we are trying to achieve and accomplish. And if you have any questions about the path forward, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish, and specific questions of Step Up, please, this is the opportunity to get those things resolved. So Nikki, I will turn it over to you, and appreciate all you do.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'll just start going through the slides that we've prepared today for our meeting around permanent supportive housing at Riverford Parkway. So I think as staff, one of the things that we have recognized is that we're at a crossroads with respect to the Ramada property. As many of you know, the city entered into a purchase and sales contract earlier in the year and explored the potential for an emergency shelter on site. It became evident that that was not going to work out for that site. We heard from our funding partners as well as from the members of the community that more planning was needed to really enable us to develop an emergency shelter that would meet the needs of our community, but also be a shelter that would be sustainable over time. That takes a lot of commitment from the city, from our funding partners, from the community, a funding commitment as well. And so we want to do that right. And so we wanted to recognize that and to acknowledge that more planning is needed. But as Deborah mentioned, we are committed to that end because we know that is a need in our community. And you'll be seeing further along in the slides how we look at the issue of homelessness and how we seek to address that issue through a systems approach, a really smart approach to understand how we work on solving that issue and meeting the needs of our greater community. But really, what we learned is that we weren't ready and that we needed to reinitiate a planning process. But we still have a real estate contract. And so that contract expires December 15th. And that means that the city must give notice that we're either going to withdraw our contract or proceed. And so with the partners in the community, not ready really to commit to those purchase and operations, we went forward with the decision to pursue a planning process instead. As staff, we really tried to look at things, look at the situation, look at the landscape, and try to understand what goals that we could accomplish. We've built so much sharing of information. There's been so much sharing of information with the community around this that we wanted to try to understand if there was a win-win possible. And so we developed these three goals that we believed would meet us where we are, meet the community where we are, and meet a potential development company with an opportunity to look at a permanent supportive housing. So those are the three goals that we want to put forward tonight. Is that goal one, we want to continue to work with our funding partners and with the community on a new consultant-led planning process for an emergency shelter in our community. We're holding true to that. Goal two, we will continue but wind down those shelter operations that are currently in place at the Ramada until March 31st, 2022, while working on housing solutions for each participant. But goal three is a handoff that real estate contract at the Ramada to a private entity, nonprofit partnership so that a repurpose can happen. So that property can convert from a hotel use, as it is now, to a permanent supportive housing use to meet the need. So with that, what does that look like? So permanent supportive housing at Ramada looks like 50 units or better of permanent affordable housing for homeless veterans and 50 units of permanent affordable housing for chronically homeless individuals. You're going to hear more about that from Step Up later on in the presentation, and also how they provide on-site wraparound services to support those residents. So this is converting from a shelter use into a housing use, and that is what we'll hear more about later. The partners of this is number one, Shangri-La Industries. So how this works is that Shangri-La, they're a for-profit developer and general contractor. They would purchase the hotel and then renovate it into housing, and they would continue to own that property. So the city would no longer be in the position of purchasing that hotel or doing anything with it. We would basically assign that contract to Shangri-La, and that company would then buy the property, renovate it into housing, and then continue to own it in perpetuity for that use. And then they partner with Step Up on 2nd Street, who is here with us tonight, as a nonprofit housing provider that operates the project and then provides the on-site supportive services to residents. And this is based on a model that this partnership has used in other cities across our country. And we're really excited to learn more about how that has been successful for them and what lessons they have learned along the way. That funding model, which I think is really unique and really presents quite a great opportunity here for the city of Asheville, is that private funds, so not public funds, but entirely private capital, is used to purchase and renovate that hotel. And then federal housing vouchers, housing choice vouchers, as you may have heard them named in the community, that's what is used to really pay that ongoing carrying costs. It pays the rent, which covers that funding and covers the operational costs of the property itself. And then local funding is used to provide those step-up on-site supportive services, and that's currently estimated at $500,000 per year. So that's how that funding model operates. We just wanted to be clear and really share that so it's understood of what we're talking about and what kind of model is used here with this particular partner. And what we see here and what staff saw in our conversations with this group is that there were a lot of pros with how that could work as a potential option for that Ramada property. It's a strategic opportunity to meet a critical need for permanent supportive housing. It adds 100+ long-term affordable housing units to our community, and there's a high return on that public investment. What we're looking at with Step Up is to help fund those supportive services for a 3-year period, and they have asked for a $1.5 million grant of ARPA grant in public dollars to really support that. But we see that as a high return on investment, where if the city chooses to approve a $1.5 million grant application, that would then leverage private capital on the order of 10 million plus to see that hotel be converted into a permanent supportive housing use. But as Deborah said before, we recognize that this is a short turnaround time with little opportunity for public engagement. But again, I think we had wanted to see what was possible for this site that is, currently a hotel, right? Has been a hotel used for quite a number of years. And if not for this potential pivot, would likely continue to be a hotel for years to come. We wanted to take the opportunity to provide this option for city council members to review and look at. That will be coming up for vote next Tuesday night, the 14th, as an option for them to consider. And I think when I think about the pros and cons here, what's important to me is that in our community, we have a lot of housing service providers right now, a lot of providers that are trying to meet the need. And it's very evident to me that we need all of these providers coming together. It is such a deep need in our community for affordable housing that we've got to be prepared with looking at multiple different paths to get there. And we have to get there with our existing partners. I want to speak to the good work that Homeward Bound is doing right now, as well as Haywood Street. I know we've been working with them on a potential ask for affordable housing, but I truly believe that having more partners at the table can really help lift and really help meet the need of our affordable housing crisis in our community. So we welcome the opportunity to partner. We welcome the opportunity to onboard new partners to really help rise all ships. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Husky, and he's going to help us really understand how this permanent supportive housing use really fits in with our housing crisis response system. So Brian, do you want to take it from here? And I'll be happy to forward slides as you need.
Great. Thank you so much, Nikki. So homelessness at its most basic level is a housing crisis. And so Asheville, as many communities are doing, is building out its housing crisis response system. And so the way we know how we can end homelessness is to house people. The most emergent need that a homeless person has is the lack of a safe, affordable place to live. And so by housing people who are experiencing homelessness as quickly as we possibly can, with no preconditions, and with the appropriate services wrapped around them to ensure that they remain housed, that's where we're trying to get in implementing additional permanent supportive housing units in the community. In terms of the overall crisis response system, there's multiple components of it, and Asheville already has a lot of these in place and a lot of it really great work already being done. We have excellent street outreach, some of which is funded by the city of Asheville itself. We have some other street outreach that we were fortunate to put in place with some of our community development block grant dollars and emergency solutions grant dollars that were COVID related. Prevention and diversion. Of course, we want to prevent homelessness whenever we can. And when someone presents as recently homeless as if we can figure out ways to divert them to other options besides entering the homeless services system, we want to do that when we can as well. Part of the entire system is coordinated entry, where we are prioritizing the most vulnerable people in the community to be housed first. And vulnerability is determined by a number of different factors, but it's typically folks who are unsheltered, have been homeless for extended periods of time, and have multiple conditions that place them at great risk if they remain on the streets, and at the highest risk of death the longer that they remain on the streets. We have, thanks to not only COVID-related money, but other federal dollars, a good system of rapid rehousing in place for folks that perhaps need a little bit less in terms of wraparound services and long-term rental assistance. But the thing that we are lacking in the community is an adequate supply of permanent supportive housing units. Fortunately, we have some underway with the city's support in partnership with the Dogwood Health Trust and Buncombe County for the acquisition of the Days Inn on Tunnel Road, which will produce 85 units of permanent supportive housing. But if you talk to our homeless services providers in the community who are working to get people from the streets and into housing, if you ask them what we need more of, without hesitation, they're going to tell you, we need more permanent supportive housing. As Nikki previously mentioned, and our city manager, Deborah Campbell, also mentioned, we are also committed to creating that low barrier emergency shelter in the community that's been a long missing gap in our continuum of services. So we're working on these two things simultaneously. We definitely need the shelter because we need to keep people alive, but until we can get them into housing. But we've got to get the housing in place so we can make sure that we have people that don't end up in the shelter for long, long periods of time. Next slide, please. Matthew Desmond, who wrote a really great book called Evicted: Poverty and Profit in the American City. I love this quote. He says that a home is the wellspring of personhood. And if you look at Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think this is a great illustration of what Matthew Desmond is saying. If you don't have a safe place to call home, it's pretty hard to be part of a community. It's difficult to maintain self-esteem and dignity, to stay clean and healthy, and to be in a position stable enough where you can seek additional education or try to gain employment. And the things that many of us take for granted, having a place to go to the bathroom, to bathe, to be free from the potential to be victims of violent crime, these things we take for granted, and folks who do not have their foundational needs met, a place to call home where they can feel safe, it's really hard to have that sense of belonging to a community. And so the building block of having a safe place to live is just critical in helping to rebuild lives of folks who are exiting homelessness and into housing. Next slide, please. So what is permanent supportive housing? Well, it's really not unlike any other multifamily residential development. It targets a specific population, and it provides the right level of social services support to get tenants connected up to community resources based on their individual needs and aspirations and choices. Asheville's existing permanent supportive housing efforts by Homeward Bound and many others in the community, we have retention rates of better than 90% of folks that get housed, stay housed. The model in collaboration with Step Up, their retention rate is more like 97%. And I'll let Todd and Aaron speak to that here shortly. But once we have someone housed, the work begins to ensure that they stay housed. We want to get them housed and keep them housed. And those supportive services that are wrapped around folks, that's one of the primary intentions of those services, is to build the skills that are necessary for them to be able to remain stable tenancy. Next slide, please. So why permanent supportive housing? And why are we focusing on this now? It's been around in various forms for a long time. There's a critical shortage of it, not only here in Asheville, but in communities across the United States. So why do we want to implement this, more of it? I'll give you a handful of reasons. I could go on for a long time about this, but there's a large body of research that supports permanent housing using the Housing First model, 20 plus year body of research that demonstrates that getting people housed and getting them safe allows us to start then putting the services in place that can help them rebuild their lives and gain stability. Permanent supportive housing also reduces the need in the community for costly interventions that we know are non-productive. Interactions with the police department, interactions with the criminal justice system, hospitalizations, emergency room utilization. And so as we reimagine public safety here in Asheville, this providing permanent housing for folks that have frequent interactions with the police and the criminal justice system, housing is a vital piece of that reimagination of public safety in our community. Permanent supportive housing also enables people who have some significant disabilities to live stably in the community. And with the right support, they become part of the community. They join a community and become part of that community. Having a safe, stable place to live gives them the opportunity to do that. Consistent access to health care, it sort of relates to the second point. If you have consistent access to health care, primary health care, behavioral health care, will have better health outcomes for people who are housed rather than leaving them on the streets. And the last point that I really want to emphasize, that provision of permanent supportive housing, it's the most dignified and humane and logical response to homelessness, because it ends homelessness for the people who we get into housing. And it means longer lives, better health, and a chance to be part of the community. Todd, I'd like to turn it over to you and Aaron at this point, and let you tell us all about Step Up and all the good work that you've been doing and your interest in coming to Asheville and helping us and our community end homelessness here.
Thank you so much, Brian. And it's a pleasure to be here joining you today. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about Step Up and also this project. So in the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to cover primarily three topics. I want to give you a background about our organization, who STEP is, and then I want to talk about permanent supportive housing and motel conversions from a little bit of a broader context to give you a base of understanding. And then finally, the third topic I'll cover is to dive much deeper into the project, the Ramada project, and how that's going to work operationally. So let's get started. First, a little bit about our organization. Again, I'm Todd Lipka, and I've been the CEO and president for the past 20 years with Step Up. And Step Up is an organization we started in Santa Monica. We've been around since 1984, and we really started as a mental health organization. We have psychiatrists on staff and licensed clinical social workers. So we do a lot of clinical work, but we're really an organization that creates belonging. I love Brian's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that middle need was love and belonging. And this is what we're really trying to do with individuals who are disenfranchised. They've been on the street for years. So that's really our focus as an organization, is the individuals have been on what HUD defines as chronically homeless, which is a year or more of homelessness. But really, Step Up works with many people who have been homeless for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30. We've even worked with individuals who are homeless for 40 years. We place thousands of people in housing. So the Step Up organization is a national organization. We're in 4 states, of course, California, Florida, Tennessee, and Georgia. And we're looking forward to the prospect of being a solution in North Carolina as well. We have about 350 staff in our organization, and our budget is about $45 billion per year. And we have right now 14 housing projects, all of them, as Brian talked about, permanent supportive housing projects, all individuals who've been on the streets for years. And some of them with a mental illness, some of them with a physical and mental illness, and a number with a mental illness and a substance abuse issue. So it's something we're very, very comfortable with. When we go into a new community, we want to talk with the community and find out who are the individuals who've been on the street the longest, who are the most problematic. You know, that the police know and are always seeing the various systems of care that the government has that are very expensive, that Brian called out, the ER, the 911 calls, the jails and the courts, because those are the individuals that are the most expensive, the most problematic. But we also know that the model that we have is successful in housing those individuals and keeping them housed and have them reintegrate, as Brian talked about, into the community. And I want to go back and emphasize what Brian said. We look at retention rates as an organization, and that retention rate is defined as when we move somebody into housing from day one, we look a year later if that individual is still in housing. And I think Brian talked about a 90+% in Asheville. Across the country, 80 to 85% is about the norm, and Step Up has a 97% retention rate. And that's particularly special when you think about we're working with some of the most challenging individuals on the street. So we got into developing housing in the early 90s. We were a full-blown mental health organization, but we realized that for many of the people that we were serving, they were being left out. Nobody, private landlords, even affordable housing, they didn't want people who were homeless, and particularly people who were homeless who were struggling with complex issues. So we decided to get into the housing development business to provide the housing ourselves. So we've been doing this now for decades. And our first project came online in 1994 in Santa Monica. It's right in downtown Santa Monica next to the 3rd Street Promenade. So I just want you to know, as an aside, we're very familiar with destination communities like Asheville. We work in Santa Monica, we work in Beverly Hills, we work in Hollywood, we're doing a project in Orlando. So we're very familiar with the particular issues that destination cities like Asheville have. So we did a number of projects in the 90s and the 2000s, and unfortunately, this model for developing housing, Brian talked about permanent supportive housing a lot, and that's the nomenclature, and he defined it well. But the system for developing this housing, which is pretty much funded by the government, is a very complex, cumbersome, and complicated system. These are very complex deals that end up costing a lot more than they should and end up taking a lot more time than they should. And I'll just give you the numbers for Los Angeles, some of the projects. And I hope you're sitting down as you listen to these numbers. And again, this is not Asheville, but just to give you an idea, in an expensive real estate community like Los Angeles, it literally takes 6 years to get these projects from day one until they open. And it costs about $600,000 per unit. And that's whether you do rehab or new construction. Step Up thought that was really insane. You know, you could buy a house in many communities across this country at $600,000, and to take 6 years, people are going to die on the street. People who need this life-saving help of housing will pass away before you ever get these built. Or, as the case of Los Angeles, there'll be 10 times more homeless people by the time you finish construction on the project. So we really looked early on to innovate. How can we get housing online faster and less expensively? And we've been partnering with Shangri-La, which is a private company, and Step Up is a 501c3 nonprofit, to really find a solution to a better pathway to creating housing faster and less expensively. Now, this idea of permanent supportive housing, I just want to talk about that a little bit more. When you're talking about homeless individuals, particularly people who've been on the street the longest, if you give them housing but without services, they're going to fail because they need the support. They're going to fail because the reasons that they're on the street for so long, they don't have the skills to manage in the housing. But on the other hand, if you provide services without housing, you're simply maintaining somebody in a state of homelessness and never solving their fundamental problem. So I know a shelter is very important to the city of Asheville, but I want you to know that Step Up really doesn't ever do any kind of housing that's not permanent housing. And when we go into a community, we always have housing resources for all the people that we're going to serve, because we know without housing, that Maslow's hierarchy, you're still on the physiological level, you're still surviving day to day. And let me reassure you, we've housed thousands and thousands of people in our organization with decades of homelessness. Living on the street is a life of misery. There's no glamour to it. You spend 100% of your energy just surviving day to day. It's a humiliating, stigmatizing experience, and it's self-stigmatizing. And homeless people, particularly chronically homeless people, they want housing. Now, it may not appear that way, because if they're going to the bathroom in the bushes, or they're resistant to interventions, or they are angry, appear angry, or acting out, I can tell you our experience is that these individuals, it's because they've been disappointed so many times over so many years that they've essentially given up hope. So when we house individuals in a project like the Ramada Inn, we have these projects throughout California. We're about to do another probably 20 motel conversions over the next couple of years, in addition to the Prospective Asheville project. But they all work very similar. We have projects I'll give you an example. We have actually one of the things I'm proudest of is a motel conversion we did in Hollywood. And this project is right near the corner of Hollywood and Vine, you know, the famous intersection in Hollywood. This was a 1920s building, and we bought the building and converted it with Shangri-La into a permanent supportive housing project, 36 units. And we took individuals from the streets of Hollywood who had been chronically homeless, living on the streets for years, many of them with a serious mental illness. And the most amazing thing about this project is there's a preschool literally next door, and there's an elementary school literally 1 block away. And if if you know anything about this field, the PTAs are probably going to be the most vocal opponents to having this kind of housing near a school. Well, not only were they not opponents, but most schools supported the project. And that's because we took individuals from that community and we made a commitment to the community. In fact, Step Up has a good neighbor agreement that I'll be sharing with you. That really talks about how we're a good neighbor in every community that we're working with. So we're committed to being a good neighbor in Asheville, not only with the immediate neighbors of the shopping center, some of the residences, but with the provider community of homeless services and the entire resident community with you. And that's partly why I'm here today. And not only did the school support it, but the project opened in 2013. And we've been harmoniously living together since then without any real issues. And I know that may be a little jaw-dropping to you, but that is our reality. Homeless individuals want housing. If you do the right model of housing with intensive services on site, individuals relish that and they embrace that. Not that they don't have challenges, because one of the biggest processes that we go through is it takes a few months, because as people move into housing, they're having to unlearn the survival skills that they learned to survive on the street and learn all the activities of daily living that you and I know well. How do you cook a meal? How do you clean your apartment? How do you shop for food? How do you stay on a budget? So that's the broader model, and it's worked time and time and time again in communities just like Asheville. Not only across the country, but Step Up has done many of these projects that are very successful and in housing the individuals who are the most challenging. So the model that we'll have in Asheville is replicated in every other project that we do. If it's a 100-unit project, we have two components of what we do. We have supportive services and property management. So the supportive services, and that's what Nikki talked about, is the $1.5 million commitment. We'll underwrite the support staff that will be on site. We'll have one full-time staff for every 25 residents. So we'll have at least 4 staff on site. And their 100% of their job will be working day to day with all the tenants on an individual basis. They'll be working with the tenants through that initial challenging period when they're adapting to their housing. You know, I have to tell you, in our experience, when you've been living on the street for years, it's not uncommon when somebody moves into housing that it actually takes them about a year to start sleeping in their bed. Think about that for a second. That seems so, doesn't make sense, but when you've been used to sleeping outside, that's what you're used to when you've been doing it for years. So it really does take quite a while to adapt. A lot of people congregate all their belongings in one small area because that's the way they can stay safe on the street and make sure they're not stolen. So this is what we do with each individual as they progress, is to help them understand you are safe. You can sleep in the bed. Here's how you clean. You don't, we had one woman who moved in and she was getting up at 6:30 every morning and going to the bus stop. And when we talked with her about why she was doing it, she said, well, when I was living in a shelter, we had to get out every morning and had to do something. We couldn't stay in the shelter. So I just got used to doing that. And we said, you know what? You can actually sleep in the morning. You don't have to get up so early and get out. This is your place. You can choose what you want. So the supportive services staff are working intensively with each tenant on a day-to-day basis to see how they're doing, to help them with any challenges they have, monitoring. And what we're really trying to do is create a sense of community. Now that we're addressing those physiological needs that's on the ground level, we're starting to address some of the psychological needs and to create a sense of connection of them with us and of the different tenants with each other. So, and as people stabilize, which is usually within 3 to 6 months, then the role of our staff on site is to help connect each tenant to outside things that are going to enrich their life, that bring them up to that middle tier of a sense of belonging. Is it taking classes? Is it a part-time job? Is it volunteer work? What is it that is going to connect you to other people and have meaning in your life and give you that greater sense of belonging? So that's and that's going to include outside organizations as well. So we know a lot of homeless people are connected to multiple organizations in Nashville. So the staff on site are going to work with each organization so that everyone's working in coordination to help that individual achieve their goals. And we know those goals will change over time. So that's the supportive services component. The second component is property management. So we will have 2 live-in resident managers who handle the property management function. They'll be there living full-time. They'll be the eyes and the ears 24/7 of the property, and they do the typical property management functions, collect the rent, take care of maintenance, but they're also part of the solution because property management and services will work together in combination to the benefit of each tenant, but just from a different perspective. So this 2-legged stool is enhanced with a 3rd leg of outside supportive services agencies that the individuals are already engaged with. So the 3-legged stool of support, supportive services, property management, and outside services, service organizations, really provide a rich supportive environment. And since we're there every single day as eyes and ears, we can address any issues early and resolve them. But I have to tell you that in my experience, the biggest issues come from not the tenants, but guests of tenants. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing is, from an architectural standpoint, putting cameras, address security, try and control access onto the property so that our staff can monitor who's coming in and who's not. We, of course, want the guests, the tenant staff guests, but we want to make sure that they're not going to cause a problem. So we do lots of things to address that. We're going to work with local police. So we've done this time and time again. And what happens is these apartment buildings, because the motel will become 100 studio apartments, and it will become an apartment building. And these individuals will rise to that 3rd level of belonging and be engaged in the community in new ways than when they were homeless. You know, I know that there have been complaints sometimes that people say, oh, your tenants are going to the bathroom in the alleyway, or they're congregating, they're loitering somewhere. And almost all the time, it doesn't tend to be our tenants. It tends to be other homeless individuals that get associated. So we do a lot to reduce any non-tenants coming to a project. That's why we never have services on site for non-tenants. This is an apartment building, and over time, it becomes transparent to the community. And it's just a great looking building that is just another apartment building. Oh, and by the way, since it's not a motel, you don't have the continual going in and coming out. It'll reduce congestion because these are now residents. One other thing I want to address is I know there's been an article circulating that was about Step Up from a couple years back about one of our projects. And there's a lot of misinformation about that, but it didn't shine a very positive light on that particular project. And I just want to say that project was, I mean, of the myriad of wonderful articles about our organization. In fact, Steve Lopez of the LA Times, who wrote the book The Soloist that became the movie with Jamie Foxx about a mentally ill individual, he wrote a front page article about the Vine project that I talked about because it was a home to John Germain, who was homeless for 30 years in Beverly Hills until he moved into this housing project. He moved into it in 2013, and he's still there today, and he's stably housed. But this one negative article was really about partners that we had partnered with and some of their actions that had taken place before we came into the partnership and really got involved. And when we found out what those things were, we ejected them from the partnership and really felt like victims ourselves. And then Shangri-La and Step Up, as a deep partnership, took over the projects completely and that project is scheduled to open in about a month. So I know there's some misinformation. I'd be happy to clarify that if people have specific questions, but I want to reassure you there are hundreds of positive stories, and we have numerous buildings that are highly integrated in the community. And in fact, the principal from the preschool next door to the Vine building was willing to talk to another principal in another area near where a building we were going to site. That's how much they endorse what we do. So I know that's a lot of information, but I want to assure you that Step Up is committed to being a good neighbor in Asheville. We're committed to being transparent and listening and incorporating input, but also bringing this tried and true model of a 97% retention rate of those who are most challenging in your community when they're on the street, in a way that they'll succeed. In this particular project, as Nikki talked about, half are going to be veterans and half are going to be chronically homeless individuals. So we'll also work with the VA staff. There'll be VA staff on site as well as Step Up staff in ensuring that every tenant has the best hope of not only stabilizing in these units, but also rising to that third level of Maslow's hierarchy of feeling a sense of belonging in the community. Because we know once they pass that first year of stability, the likelihood of their staying long-term is very, very likely. And we also know, as Brian talked about, that their interaction once they're housed with law enforcement, with 911, with going to the ER for their health issues, with involvement in the courts, all that historically in every one of our projects goes way down over time. After the first year, you see a tremendous drop in all those interactions with the most expensive government systems of care that are really crisis-related systems, because people stabilize and they don't need that help anymore.
Great.
Nikki,
Thank you,
I'll
Chad.
turn it back to you.
Excellent. And I just want to say thank you for sharing that information. It's really great to hear about your work and your approach. So I appreciate you sharing that information. I just think one more thing that I wanted to share, because it was a question that I fielded earlier today and wanted to make sure that we cover, is really about the timing and how quickly this came about. And it certainly has been quick, but as what I understand, and Brian really has been our point person here, but I understood that both Shangri-La and Step Up had looked to site a project in Asheville for some time and had been looking to, at different hotels in the area to understand where there could be a good fit. But quite frankly, when the city became, had the understanding that the emergency shelter was not going to proceed at this location, we were able to connect the dots, right, and connect Step Up to this opportunity, Shangri-La to this Step Up to this opportunity to see if we had something here. And so we're fortunate that timing has worked out, and we hope that that we can see some positive results come before City Council next week.
And Nikki, maybe I should just address the timing of the project too in terms of concrete details. So if we're able to negotiate the transfer of that contract, and we're engaged with the owner right now, then we will probably close on the project in February or so. And there are about 50 individuals living in a shelter basis in the units. They will stay there, and we'll move them. The motel is two separate physical buildings. So we'll move all those individuals that are staying there now into one building. Shangri-La will rehab the vacant building, and that would probably take 6 to 8 months or so. And then once all those units are rehabbed, those individuals in the other building will become residents of those units. And then we'll rehab the other building, the vacant building. And that will take another 6 to 8 months. And then the veteran tenants will all move into those buildings. So the first benchmark should be acquire the property in February or so. By the fall, late fall, we should be opening the first building for those individuals to move in. And then by probably early summer or so, the second building will be complete, and then the veteran tenants will move into that.
Excellent. So I hope that information has been helpful to really share out to our listeners and our community today. And so I think at this point, We are ready to open the floor for questions. We have some email questions that we have that I know Ashley is going to help us with. And I know we have a caller queue. So I think, Ashley, if I'll turn it over to you and you can lay our ground rules here, and then we can start with the live questions.
Thank you, Nikki. So for everyone who's on the line, we're going to ask that people still follow those same council rules of decorum. Just a reminder, if you're listening in and you want to be heard, to please call 855-925-2801. When prompted for this meeting, the code is 4928. Once again, the code is 4928. And then you will hit the *3 and you'll enter the speaker queue. I'm going to go ahead and start first with our callers who've been on the line, and then we'll work our way through the comments that we've received. Stand by, Nikki. Our first caller ending 2266, your line is open.
Grant Millen, and I'm running for city council. And my first college paper was on homelessness. I worked in commercial photography, motion picture production for 17 years, and I researched a documentary on the war on drugs and worked with a harm reduction specialist many years ago. I'm not saying I'm an expert on these things, but I'm aware. I actually just became aware that it's over half of our homeless population are veterans. I'm an honorably discharged veteran. So I'm glad we saved this idea of the opportunity of securing the East Asheville residents in, because it was on the rocks. It looked like it was not going to work. And I want to say, just heard everybody's perspective, but maybe some colors. I want to say that the residents, the neighbors in the vicinity of that residence, and they're not just experiencing some kind of panic, unreasonable panic or NIMBYism. I had to help them use the APD Simplicity database to understand that APD calls for service rose over 100% in that area, a 1 mile radius of that residence in over the past 10 years. And that's just data. And a lot of it is concerning. There's overdoses and death investigations. The death investigations have to be rectified through the buncombe medical examiners. And we aren't there yet. We aren't understanding crime, public safety, and public health in a really in-depth way yet. Mayor Mannheimer, in talking about this just this week in the Citizen Times, she said, we need a study. And I'm calling it the Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Wellness Study, that it isn't just going to be Step Up or Shangri-La's perspective on what the best practices are for. I have a lot of business background, and we talk about strategy as out of control or control, and it's not controlling people. It's not about one race being in control of someone else, but we aren't going to have a city that's experiencing what the West Coast is experiencing. I was born in San Francisco, and when the gentleman with Step Up references Los Angeles, it's well known that Los Angeles has an expansive homelessness problem, and the whole nation is going to be coming together. And so our study of our challenges is going to be a national model. It's not just going to be locals chiming in. There'll be a local voice, but it needs to be a national benchmark in intervening or intercepting now before Asheville degrades. And not everybody is going to be able to move here. There isn't really a housing for all solution. everybody can move here. And that goes for rich people too. We need to change our tourism development authority model to a community economic development model. We are not a tourism theme park, and we are not tourism theme park characters. This Ramada Inn is kind of a milestone in really getting real. Just like with a reparations study, it's these are kind of milestones in getting real about where Asheville is at. We've got to talk about the fentanyl, illegally manufactured fentanyl disaster that's unfolding here in Asheville and Buncombe County. We are just going to have a harm reduction and permanent housing backstop for people making money from selling fentanyl in our community. We're going to have to do direct action with law enforcement, and our law enforcement are doing their duty. But anyways, so Asheville's not just going to be a localism where a lot of sleeping dogs lie. We're gonna open this up, and glad we saved this though, because we needed to secure that site, and now we're talking about a plan B. And Deborah, we need to get the RFP responses for the plan A for IPS 298. We need to reveal that where that was headed, because that's part of the lessons learned. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Grant. Ashley, do you want to queue up our next caller?
I will bring in the next
Okay.
caller. Please stand by one moment. Okay, caller, can you hear us? Are you on the line?
I can.
Okay, please proceed. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to comment, but I do want to emphasize the fact that there was no advance notice for this meeting. So we're excluding a lot of people who would have something to say here. And I understand this is a short timeline, but it should have been planned more in advance. Number one, I absolutely support this project. I think it sounds fantastic. I love the support services that are planned for residents. And I am an Oakley resident. I live less than a mile, maybe a half mile from the location. I am absolutely okay with this in our neighborhood and support it. So previously, during the previous discussions, there was a promise to put a representative of the Oakley neighborhood on the managing committee, board, whatever that manages this project. I would request that follow through with this project, having a representative from Oakley. I think the deal was with Oakley Neighborhood Association, so I would strongly support that being included in this project. I'm really impressed by the project partners. I've never heard of them before, but I think they're fantastic. But I'd really like to know what local organizations have been engaged on this and how local organizations will be engaged going forward.
Thank you for those. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and just in terms, like the previous caller commented on a 100% increase in crime or police calls over the past 10 years. I think the population has expanded probably by much more than that, 200% maybe over the last 10 years. So I'm not sure how relevant that number is. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I heard some questions. Does anyone have some information around partners that may be engaged? Go ahead, Brian. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit to that. So with any permanent housing project that is put into place, these projects take referrals through what I mentioned earlier, through the process called coordinated entry, which is referrals that are coming from street outreach providers, from other homeless services providers in the community. So there is a wide collaboration of existing agencies that will be seeking to place their clientele that they're working with specifically through that coordinated entry process. These 100+ units that would be created will give another outlet for housing placements. And part of the objective is to reduce the length of time that people spend homeless. So there is already that coordinated entry system in place with multiple agencies participating in that and referring folks to housing opportunities in the community. So that's already in place, and part of my role over the next few months as this unfolds, and my colleague Emily Ball will be to get step-up staff integrated in with those agencies to make those introductions and begin those collaborations even before they start moving tenants in.
And then any feedback or comment on, and Todd, just so you know, we had talked about working with the local neighborhood association, the Oakley Neighborhood Association, and forming somewhat of a management committee or a neighborhood committee that would provide a needed communication link to what was the emergency shelter project. So I think the sentiment that I really hear is moving forward, how can the neighbors stay involved, and has there ever been any kind of formal participation that could be considered?
Well, years ago, we used to have like a neighborhood advisory committee in some of our earlier projects, but there was really nothing to report. And in fact, so they kind of fizzled out on their own. I'm not sure we need a structure, but we can hold regular attendance at their meetings to to have improved communication and listen to any concerns. I mean, we will definitely be engaged with them, and I think that's probably the best way. We'll be happy to go to them, and if they provide a forum for us, we're happy to gather their input and give them updates too.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Nikki, I'm going to go to our next caller, phone number ending 4057. Caller, your line is open.
Hi there. Yeah, so I just learned that there's currently being a sweep of a large homeless population close to the downtown area. And I guess I'm just feeling, I'm curious why y'all are deciding to change the Ramada Inn from being an emergency shelter, because we need more emergency shelters, and I don't know where these people are supposed to go. I'm curious about that decision because it feels insensitive to me. I know that y'all are working through a lot of varied issues, and there's a lot of pieces to this, but for the people that need the shelter right now, I don't know where they're supposed to go.
Thank you. Panel, would you like to answer that one?
And Deborah, I'm looking to see if you want to chime in on that component. I can certainly talk about the complexities of the project with the shelter. I mean, I think the biggest hurdle was funding, and I think that was one of the things that we really needed to further refine. I mean, we were looking at cost to acquire the property of $9 million plus, and with ongoing carrying costs in terms of actually performing the operation of having the on-site staff and having the necessary services to administer the emergency shelter, we were looking at upwards of $2.5 million a year to really do that, and we need time to plan that out. And I think that was the biggest challenge we were having, is trying to make all that fit, because I am in complete agreement that we desperately need an emergency shelter, but I think we've got to really focus in on doing that proper planning so that over the long haul we have more sustainable success. And that's, I certainly have a lot of heartburn, because I know that need is great, but we had to really respect the fact that we needed to do that planning.
And I guess I will chime in a little bit in terms of I think the terminology was the term was used, sweep of homeless encampments. Our goal is to shelter people in this community. And right now, as you appropriately stated, we just do not have enough beds and places to place people who need that shelter. Also, there is the complexity of existing camps are in locations where property owners have said that they want the shelters removed. We are doing our best to coordinate with other nonprofits to try to find places where they can get out of, first and foremost, the cold, because it is below freezing weather in Asheville these days, and make sure that people have shelter. Will we be able to give everyone indoor shelter? Probably not, but we're going to do our best to coordinate. And when we, as you say, do these sweeps, we always try to find a location for folks to be housed. That's why we don't come in the day of and take that action. We take our time, overtime, to see if we can find locations to place people. I don't know, Emily or Brian, if you all want to comment.
I'm happy to jump in, and I would just echo really what both of you have already said. I want to say really clearly that the city is committed to pursuing an additional emergency shelter in our community. And I also want to call out Sunrise for the great job that they've done in the current operation that's been really essential for our community these last several months, number of months now. And we know that this is critical for people to stay alive in our community and for people to get connected to the services they need. So please don't hear anything but an unwavering commitment from the city of Asheville to pursue development of this type of project. We just have recognized from conversation with community partners and funding partners that this location, this dollar amount, this timeline, this project configuration is not best fit, is not what is widely supported across our community, but we are undeterred and we will continue on that path. We hope to bring a project back in the near future to our community, and we hope to have good consensus from our community along the way before we get that operational.
And Nikki, if I can just add something, as Nikki pointed out, doing a shelter is often as expensive as doing permanent supportive housing. And I just want you to know that if we're successful together in this project, that Shangri-La and Step Up are committed to doing additional motel conversions in Asheville to create more permanent supportive housing units. So we're committed over the long term to being a solution to all of your chronic homelessness.
All right, turning it back over to Ashley or Angelica, if you want to queue up the next question or caller.
Yes, I'll bring in the next caller. Please stand by. This next caller, last four digits of the phone number are 4191. Please go ahead and speak when you're ready.
Hi, is this me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear
thank you. This is Chris. I live in Montford. Got 3 kids in school here. And we've seen the homeless encampment next to the highway there, and we drive by it a lot. You know, my children ask me about what's going on there, and I tell them, and then I had to tell them recently that the people that are already forced to sleep outside there and fend for themselves are now being kicked out of there. And they asked me where they're going to go. And, you know, y'all had this emergency shelter plan. Now that's apparently off the table because you can't build consensus. You know, I think that this is something that we're required to do as a community for the least among us and for the, you know, for those who are suffering, and especially this time of year when it's so cold and when we're also supposed to be thinking about those less fortunate and the people that are suffering in our world and giving to them. And instead, it looks like we're taking away. And, you know, I listened to the gentleman talk about the Step Up project. It sounds good. I don't know much about it in other places and the success, and I'll look into that. But I just wanted to know, I want to know what I should tell my children about what we are doing now to help people not only get in out of the cold, but to feel safe and to have somewhere to go where they're not harassed, and especially by a potentially overzealous police department. And I want to, and that's my question. So thank you.
So I think in hearing your question, we certainly hear it. I think we all know, and we've all seen the camp, and acknowledging where we move forward as a city. I mean, certainly I was disappointed as well that the emergency shelter wasn't going to come together. I've spent several months, staff, you know, committed to that and really trying to push that forward. The community meetings like this that we've held, other, you know, seeing the successes that we've had. But we had to acknowledge that the city couldn't do it by itself with just the city. And I think we had to recognize that. And so committing to a planning process with our funding partners and with the community is our next best step. And I know that it's hard. And I, you know, personally, you know, I know that. But again, we're trying here to identify, yes, a permanent supportive housing for the SAVE, right? To really see that we can at least build on what we have got there at Ramada. Absolutely. And yes, commit to emergency shelter in our community. I mean, I think the one thing that I have been so grateful for through this entire process is that we have brought awareness to this issue, and I've been so impressed by the community members like yourself that have recognized this need in a deep way. And I think we're going to build on that and really help an emergency shelter launch in full partnership with our funding partners and with a sustainable plan for the future. And so right now, I think the best we're going to be able to do is having a code purple option that will be on the council's agenda for next Tuesday. So we've got that in the works, and we're working as hard as we can to get this permanent supportive housing at liftoff. And again, you know, come the first of the year, we're ready to start working with partners sincerely on the emergency shelter for our community.
Thank you, Nikki. Our next caller is with the phone number ending 0714. Your line is now open.
Hey there, this is Mel Noyes. I also wanted to reiterate the fact that there is an encampment sweep at the Haywood campsite right now. APD is kicking them off of where they've been living. This is really hard to hear considering the meeting that the emergency shelter will no longer be an option come March. These sweeps, they're traumatic. It makes it really hard for community members to find our people. And I don't believe the question of where folks go now was answered. There's literally, where else can they go? There's not sufficient code purple shelters. You know, y'all still haven't provided a low barrier or high access shelter. So where do they go now?
where will they be safe? Why don't we have city sanctioned camping yet so that they have somewhere that they can stay safely while we figure out this low barrier shelter situation? So we need a shelter like that, like now. And harm reduction and mental health experts need to be at a formal planning process. And as far as the funding goes, like, don't we have $26 million in ARP money for whatever? I'm not sure how much the city has spent yet, but surely not all of it. How much is left in the rainy day fund? How come you haven't defunded APD yet? You know, you could allocate some APD money to help fund a low barrier shelter every year. And if our folks' basic needs were met, then APD wouldn't need their jobs anyway. And is there a timeline for Plan B? Like, how long is that going to take? You're going to talk about it in 2022. Hopefully, you said January, so hopefully you stay true to your word. But I was just told that 20 houseless folks have died in the past 2 months. So just wondering how many more people have to die because you don't feel this urgency. Your commitment to this plan doesn't really mean anything until there's receipts, and your commitment doesn't really mean anything when you're listening to the not in my backyard people instead of organizations and community members who are telling you that these people need shelters now to survive, to begin their journey to stability. So that's all I have to say. Yeah, that we need the emergency shelter now, and that APD really needs to stop the encampment sweeps because it's violent. So thank you.
Thank you, caller. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Angelica, go ahead and bring in our next caller.
Okay. Our next caller is the phone number ending in 5474. And caller, please go ahead. You're on the line.
Hi, yes, my name is Loran Brown, aka Lala. I work with Midnight Ministry, and I formerly was the assistant program director in the Hayward Street Respite. I do a lot of street ministry with a group of individuals that we donate our time 100%. And the people that we serve are beautiful, misplaced people that have great talent, and they are just lost and they don't know how to get back on track. I am ecstatic to know that this organization is coming in and willing to take over the transition of the hotel. And it is definitely a godsend and an answer to our prayers, because one of the things is that people do need support once they get housed. I have noticed quite a few people that have got housed, but they're still in the streets, and it is because there is not any type of supportive services to help keep them housed. And like the organization, like they don't know how to sleep in their bed. They don't know how to clean. They don't know exactly what to do. So I guess my first question would be, one, what, like others, what are we going to do for the now? Because there are hundreds of people coming to Asheville. It seems like every day there's brand new people out here in the streets. And it is violent. They're getting things stolen from them. They're not safe. They're getting hurt. They're getting killed, and they're overdosing left and right. A lot of it is due to mental illness, but there's a lot of just different factors. What exactly are we going to do with the millions of dollars that's been granted to the city? There is a lot of abandoned buildings throughout the city that could suffice as a temporary solution. I don't know if, maybe we need to find out who owns these buildings, like all of the Kmart's that are empty, the Sears building that's empty, the Toys R Us for that matter. I mean, and then there's plenty of more empty houses and buildings throughout the city that's just been sitting here vacant for years now. Maybe this organization can help us come up with a solution on how we can do a temporary thing to get these people somewhere right now, because it is going to get cold. It's been very warm for the past couple of weeks, but that's only just a sign that the weather is actually going to get worse, and it's going to probably be really bad here really soon. And there needs to be a solution. And like one of the previous callers said, that we can't keep just displacing them and moving them around, and they have nowhere to go. Like, for the love of God, can somebody at least just grant them a space to have an encampment? Let's enforce some type of rules, some accountability in the temporary. Maybe the organization can help with that. But
Excuse me, caller. Your 3 minutes are finished. Thank you so much for your comment.
Hello?
Yes, caller, that was your 3 minute time.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
And that's certainly, I think what we've heard from the past several calls is the recognition of exactly what we understand in the terms of the landscape where we're at now. And so, again, I think what we are seeking to provide goals that we can aspire to. One is the permanent supportive housing that provides stable permanent housing for our most vulnerable community members, and then also seeking to engage partners to ensure that we have a long-term sustainable plan for an emergency shelter in our community. It takes time, it takes work. We are dedicated public servants, absolutely. I want to commend both Brian and Emily, our team assembled here today. We partner in this work, and we understand how important it is to our community, and also knowing that it takes everyone. It takes the involvement of the entire community. So I appreciate these calls. I appreciate the awareness of the issue and the advocacy here, and knowing that we've got a lot of work in front of us, but that we're committed.
And Nikki, I'll just add that I think we heard from Mr. Lipka talking about Step Up and the types of challenges that presents itself with trying to respond to these problems. And oftentimes we think that there is a simple answer, there's a silver bullet, but it is extremely complex. And that's not an excuse. It is just reality. And do we want anyone to be in a tent? No, we don't, not in this community. Do we have enough beds? No, we don't, not yet. But we are aspiring to be able to accommodate as many people as we can. But this isn't about trying to find places for people to sleep in tents. It is really about trying to find permanent housing. And that's our goal. We're not ignoring that there has to be some short-term things, and that's why we are working with as many partners as we can to address this issue. But it is a community-wide issue, and definitely the city, we will do all that we can to address the issue, and we have to address it on multiple fronts, including enforcement.
Thank you, Deborah. Our next caller, phone number ending 2130. Your line is now open. Caller ending 2130. You can go ahead and speak. Angelica, we'll go to the next caller and I'll text the caller that we missed. Wait, can you hear us now? 2130?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
But yes.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Can
hear
you hear
now.
me?
Turn off YouTube or
Okay.
whatever you're listening to. We're getting some back and forth.
Okay, perfect. Hold on just a second. Okay, so I have a number of questions. And my first question is addressed to Todd, and I'm just going to go through all my questions. So I have a question. I'm trying to understand, because the model that you are offering is totally dependent on the people on the ground in the shelter that are going in the PSH that are going to provide support for the residents. So my first question is, when you are working outside of California in these other communities, where do you find these people and how do you manage them? My second question is, what happens after 3 years? So this is a funded project for 3 years. So I'd like to hear what happens after 3 years. I'd also like to understand a little bit more about the partnership between Shangri-La and Step Up on Second, because my understanding is that Shangri-La is a for-profit developer and Step Up also does development, but in this case, they are not doing development. They are just providing the services. So I'd like to understand that relationship. I'd also like to understand who becomes the owner of this property, and moving forward, how does that, what happens with that ownership after this period of time? Thank you.
I think I can take all those. Those are excellent questions, by the way. Thank you for asking those, because that's really good information. So our model with Asheville, first of all, we have a pretty strong presence in the southeastern United States. I probably have close to 75 staff across Florida, Tennessee, and Georgia. And we've housed hundreds and hundreds of individuals in those communities. So our model as we move into a new community is we're going to take our seasoned managers, one of our seasoned managers. And so Arthur Murray, who oversees all of our Southeast operations, will personally oversee the startup of this project. And we'll bring a seasoned manager from Step Up who's familiar with our culture and philosophy, because we believe we have a special sauce. But we're also committed for the staff of this, the line staff, to be hiring locally, because we want people who are already living in that area. And we've been quite successful at that in each of our projects, so that we bring the Step Up brand, hire locally, and then we mention this term housing first. So this is the process of what we're doing, is taking people directly from the street and putting them into housing. And although it sounds counterintuitive, it really, really works. And the world expert on housing first, the person who created it, is a guy named Sam Zambiris. So he's part of the Step Up organization. We're going to bring Sam to Asheville, and he's going to do training not only for all of our staff at the project, but we'll open that up to all the service providers who are in the Asheville community to get training from the world expert on this issue, because everyone endorses this housing first methodology. So that's our plan for how we're going to staff this, and we've been successful in other cities across the country in this model. The second question is about what happens after the 3 years, and that's such an excellent question. And Nikki and Ms. Campbell may have input, but our plan is to have a continuing dialogue from day one once we're moving forward with a commitment to talk about raising the money for years after year 3, because there are going to need to be supportive services dollars. But Step Up and Shangri-La wanted to have at least a 3-year commitment moving forward for the services that will give us time to raise money, both from government sources and philanthropy, for the continued services cost. Your next question about who will be the owner and about the relationship between Shangri-La and Step Up are kind of interrelated, so I'll answer both of those at once. So Step Up is and Shangri-La are going to be co-developers. So Step Up is part of the development entity, and so we'll own the property together as co-developers, as we're doing with all of our projects. We're co-owners, and that ownership, Shangri-La and Step Up are committed, and actually we're willing to put a very long-term 50-year covenant to keep this project for low-income individuals and for homeless individuals, just conditional that we have the vouchers, because they're all very low income, so they're going to need a rental subsidy like a voucher. And I think, so just in the Step Ups in the ownership relationship, and that's what we do in all our projects. We co-own, and we're committed to owning this for the long term. Shangri-La would handle all the acquisition and all the construction. They hand it off. Step Up then does the property management and the services, but we both retain ownership over the long term. Did I answer all your questions?
She disconnected from the line.
Oh,
I took notes, Todd. I think that was the 3 questions. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I will now bring in the next caller with the phone number ending in 0760.
Hi there, this is Amy Upham, and I have 1,000 things to say, but I will try to keep it brief. The first thing I want to say is that I think my disappointment in the canceling of the Ramada is similar to my disappointment in bringing in external partners to manage the permanent supported housing. I'm all about permanent supported housing. I'm very excited that that is happening there. I'm hopeful there may be even a way to keep those folks there while they renovate part of the building. And so that they don't lose their housing in April, because most of them probably won't find a place by then. But it's this idea or trend of the city in particular bringing in outsiders to handle our problems. And one of the things that I've heard said about the Ramada is that there wasn't a plan, but there was. And actually, you know, the city was very involved in that planning, as some of the staff here have said. And then Anchor, where I'm the board chair, was incredibly involved in that planning. I can send you all the minutes if you'd like, but we talked about everything from safety and security to needle bins to services to employment services to even down to the detail of renovations. And so I know that planning processes, being a public health planner, take a long time. And I'm very concerned about the language that's coming from the city saying that we need a planning process, because that planning process happened at least the first 6 months. And so what I would like to see happen is that initial planning process continue. If we have to choose a different location, okay. But I want the city to formally invite Anchor and other harm reduction and mental health agencies to the table for that planning process. I understand you need community input from neighborhoods, but they are not experts in these services. And frankly, you shouldn't have let them dictate what happened to that building. I also understand that this message needs to go to the county. And unfortunately, this all happened too late for us to get a contingent of people to the county meeting yesterday. But we have gathered a petition that is closing on 450, 500 signatures that says we want an emergency shelter now. We want to be at the planning table. And not that we don't ever seek outside consultants. We actually did talk to a couple of low barrier shelters across the country. I'm very familiar with Sam Decembris. I've studied the Housing First model. I train on it, and I'm local. And we have asked to be at the planning table, and instead it's been in little conversations or snippets here and there. So please bring your experts in who are local. I don't see why the permanent supported housing in that project can't be run by a local organization like Sunrise, like Homeward Bound. And I also, the last thing I want to say, well, two things. One is, please do not let the current providers of homeless services steer this conversation, because the reason we have so many unsheltered is because they have higher barriers. So the whole point of this is that you need other people at the table.
The 3 minutes are finished, and we thank you so much for your comments.
And Nikki, in terms of the description of the planning process, that's definitely what we want to do, is to engage as many people who are providers. We need as much intellectual capital around the table as we can get. We would definitely not want to exclude anyone. And I guess maybe the comment about we have allowed the neighborhood people to drive this is that this is not the case. I will just leave it at that.
Thank you. Our next caller is Scott Rogers, ending 5300. Scott, your line is open.
Yes, thank you. It's just so pleased to have the city offering again another public forum, and thank you for your ongoing creativity as well as your planning process. First of all, I want to let folks know that the city and ABCCM are working together, along with the Salvation Army, as you've read on Code Purple, but ABCCM has offered a low barrier harm reduction shelter, an emergency shelter, now since 1985. So we appreciate both the planning process and want folks on the line and participating to know that we welcome you participating in the Code Purple shelter that we are calling Costello House, and many of you know it as Steadfast House. So anyone who wants to be actively involved in supporting and giving this emergency shelter option, we're here and available. I did have a question that may be for both the city and for Mr. Lipka, which is I was honing in on the $500,000 a year grant. Is this an ongoing grant, year after year commitment from the city? And if so, would Mr. Lipka please, obviously through their extensive mental health work and other work, give us a little breakdown on the scope of services, the different types of services that 500,000 will be providing in terms of permanent supportive services. Thank you all very much.
Nikki, do you want me to start on that? Thank you so much for your question. The 500,000 is a commitment for 3 years. So the city has committed for those 3 years, but the dialogue has been that there will be continuing supportive services costs from year 4 on for the life of the project. We do know that that cost will go down because as people stabilize, we will probably need less intensive services. But we also said as the Shangri-La Step Up Partnership that we need at least a 3-year commitment, and that once we move forward with the project, part of the ongoing conversation will be how do we raise the money in future years for the supportive services from year 4 on. And that can be from a variety of sources, which is it could be city money, it could be county money, state, federal money, and philanthropic money. So we'll work together with the city to put a plan into place to ensure that we have resources going from year 4 on. And in terms of the supportive services, so the staff on site will be service coordinators, and they'll work with what we call ADLs, activities of daily living, with the tenants on a daily basis. They'll connect them with local community organizations. So for mental health services, for physical health services, they'll be driving them to appointments. They'll be coordinating the services with the outside providers, because maybe some of the Asheville organizations that are providing services will come to see the tenants and provide those services in the units, but many we know won't, so that we'll be transporting and helping. We're also involved in benefit establishment to make sure that each tenant has the benefits they're entitled to, whether that's Medicaid, SSI, SSDI, or other forms of income, to make sure they have the income. That's important that they be able to pay some of their income towards the rent for the project, but also important for sustenance and daily living. They'll also coordinate every single service with any outside provider for health services. Of course, for the veteran tenants, we'll integrate highly with the VA and ensure that they get to the VA for services that are needed, and to coordinate services both at the site and with the VA. So it's really focused on ADLs through the initial period, and then providing really ongoing just support in the community for any trials and tribulations or challenges a tenant has. There'll be substance abuse counseling and connection with local organizations for any resources on that. So primarily health, mental health, substance abuse, and for the veterans, strong connection to the VA.
Thank you. I'll bring in our next caller now. Caller with your phone number ending in 0338, please go ahead.
Okay, hi, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, there must be a delay. My name is Fred Zara. I live in Swannanoa. I've been in the Asheville area for 15 years. Obviously, this country is very divided on a lot of social issues, so we're not all going to agree on everything. Just get this out of the way right up front. I'm about as honest a person as you're ever going to meet. I mean no disrespect to anyone, but I'm not here to blow smoke either. I'm not, I want to share what I know and my experience, and hopefully some out there will understand what I'm talking about. We all have our views and we all have our different experiences in life. I'm a very compassionate person. I'm very sensitive, very caring. I've had plenty of pain in my life. I know what that's like. I care about people. However, having said that, I've lived in a vehicle for 15 years of my life. I'm 59 years old now, luckily in a nice house now. I served in the Navy after high school. I went to college, got a degree, blah, blah, blah. I ended up buying an old van, went out west, sold at flea markets, traveling around, kind of enjoyed it, living in my van, traveling with my dog, kind of became a lifestyle. Not so sure I wanted to be part of this society or not, because it's kind of crazy. And also for environmental reasons, for several reasons, also anxiety and dealing with my own personal blah, blah, blah. Not trying to be a victim here, but childhood trauma, blah, blah, blah. So I have gotten to know, I've had a lot of experience in dealing with homeless people in several states. I've eaten at a lot of community meals, church meals. I always try to help donate things or help with work, help clean up, always try to give back because I'm guilt-ridden. I'm an recovering Catholic, but in any case, I don't like being a taker. I don't like the idea that I can't help myself, that I'm helpless. And I guess what I just want to share, because, just my personal perspective, I'm concerned about the whole trend in this country to not look at long-term solutions. We're constantly treating symptoms. It's the same with pharmaceuticals, constantly giving people drugs and painkillers and treating symptoms, and we're not addressing underlying problems. I just want to throw that out there. I'm all for Code Purple. When it's cold, definitely don't want to see anybody freeze to death. But I've interacted with so many people multiple times at different meals, and I don't want to generalize about homeless people. There are people with PhDs, there are people that maybe dropped out of high school. There are people that are good people. They're struggling. They have mental health issues, anxiety, depression, or schizophrenia, all different things. There are people that are thieves. They're punks, in my opinion. I know that's a value judgment, but I'm making a judgment that they steal from one another. They'll steal from anybody, including people downtown. I've had plenty of run-ins with police living in a van for years, and I've had my issues with them, definitely. But I've also found that most of them are decent people, and if they get a call, they have to go out and check it out because they also have a duty to the other citizens of the community
Caller,
to keep
thank
them
you for
safe.
your comment, but our 3 minutes are finished.
I would like to address the long-term causes of homelessness. Thank you.
Thanks.
Our next caller ends in 9214. Caller ending 9214, your mic is open.
9214. That's me.
Please turn off your TV, your computer.
9214.
Hi, I'm calling because I represent the residents of 5 neighborhoods, 2 organizations, and several business owners in the East Asheville area. There is a huge lack of transparency from the planning of the shelter to this meeting we're at right now. The community at large is very disappointed in how you have, made the decisions that you're unilaterally making and dismissed us who are paying taxes and have to live with the decisions you're making. You've cast aside our concerns, experiences, and documentation of increased crime. You've decided to hold this meeting with us, but have not given us enough information to ask the appropriate questions. As a collective, we wanted you to consider a suggestion of low-income senior housing. We were told by the mayor that this was something that was being considered, but since then it's become clear that that's not been considered at all. You claim there's a huge homeless problem, but based on your own point of in time study, which was done over one day in January, you said we have 527 homeless total, which is a 4% decrease overall with 116 sheltered, much in part due to your own COVID protocols. Based on information that we have, when in an Asheville population of approximately 86,000 people, 15% of Asheville residents are 65 and older are living in poverty. That's 1 in 7 people. And those are the people that should be helped. Based on that same population, the percentage of homeless in that same sample is 0.006%. The numbers don't lie. I don't understand your justification for yet another shelter in East Asheville when there's already a methadone clinic, a shelter at the VA, and a shelter on Tunnel Road, and a mental health facility being built just within a few miles of the Ramada location. Some of the other questions we have are, what are the entrance requirements for this type of program? What type of individuals will be allowed in the supportive housing? Is it men, women with children, couples? Exactly what type of services are going to be offered, and are they mandatory? What will you be doing to establish goodwill with the local communities and the businesses? How will safety be addressed? What sort of rules will be in place and how will they be enforced? Are there consequences for individuals who break the rules? And also, on a second note, numerous callers have been disconnected or pushed to the back of the line. So I don't know what's going on with that either.
Thank you.
Nikki, would you like me to address a number of those questions?
Absolutely.
Thanks. Those are actually excellent questions too, and I'm so glad you asked that, so I can go into a little more detail about this. The WHO will be individuals who are homeless currently, and for the chronic homeless adults, many of the individuals who are in the shelter of that motel right now would transition into units. Maybe not all of them, because by the time we finish, they may not all be there, but we'll fill those units with single adults who are chronically homeless. Same with the veterans, there'll be homeless and chronically homeless veterans. All the units, almost all the units will be for single individuals. We're looking at the possibility to make some of the units a little bit larger, but the vast majority and perhaps all of the all the tenants will be individuals, single adults. In terms of the rules, well, you have to remember, these are going to be individuals, tenants who have leases. So this is not a structured program that has requirements for participation. This is what we call a harm reduction model and a low barrier housing model, because they're individual tenants. So just like any individual in the community who has a lease in an apartment building, there are rules of the apartment building that you have to abide by. And so we have similar rules, but it's no physical violence, nothing illegal, etc. And if people violate those rules, then there are consequences to that, and the consequences depend on how severe the violation is. But we also try and work with these individuals on an ongoing basis, because they've been on the street for a long time because they failed in these systems, because the systems have been so quick to give up on them. And we don't want to do that and send them back out on the street. So we almost never evict somebody. And what we do find is over time that we can work with the individual tenant, both on the property management side and on the supportive services side, to gain compliance to the rules. So similarly, just like an individual in a leased apartment doesn't have to participate in mandatory services, we don't require that, because we don't think requiring somebody to do something is a pathway to recovery. What we do find is that with substance abuse, living on the street is pretty depressing, and people use drugs to address that. They self-medicate. But what we do find is that once people move into housing, they don't have to use drugs like they used to, because they're not in such a state of misery. And then that's part of the mental health services, is we can have dialogues with tenants about, well, if you're having some symptoms of depression or any mental health issue, we're going to connect you with mental health experts and maybe a psychiatrist for medication to address those symptoms, rather than using illegal drugs to do that. So it's really a partnership, and it's an enticing of individuals with services. And we find that it's very effective, not 100%, but with a 97% retention rate of individuals in housing, it's a pretty effective means of motivating somebody to partner with them on their goals for what they want to accomplish in their life now that they're housed.
I want to just jump in to clarify the comment about folks who are currently in shelter being people who would be housed in this location eventually. I want to clarify this partly for all the service providers who are texting me right now to say that that is not necessarily the case. So there will certainly be a gap between the current shelter winding down by the end of March and then the housing units being ready for occupancy after renovation to make them suitable for vouchers. What we will need to do as a community is work with Step Up and with the Housing Authority and with our coordinated entry process to integrate all of those pieces. So we'll need to identify how the wait list will function, how that syncs up with fair housing, how that syncs up with coordinated entry, which Brian described earlier as the process where we identify and prioritize folks for permanent housing interventions. So just wanted to clarify again that it's certainly possible that some folks who are in shelter right now may end up being able to live in one of these units, but we will need to workshop that process between the shelter conclusion and the opening of the housing development.
Thank you. We have another caller on the line with the phone number ending in 0592. Caller, please go ahead. Hello, caller. Can you hear us?
Good for y'all. I can hear you.
Okay. All right, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a resident of Oakley, and I had some questions for y'all. How many more people need emergency shelter outside of the 80 that the Ramada and the Days Inn are serving? How is your service? I don't know what to call it, high access. How is it different than low barrier? We did some research today and found out that 15% of our population for Asheville residents 60 and older are currently living in poverty versus the 0.006 population of Asheville are homeless. So which is more of a crisis to you? And how do we figure out what to do with that? As a community, we would love to see what Mayor Mannheimer wrote in an email, an elderly, low-income housing unit that we could bring our kids to and not worry about pedophiles and people using drugs and alcohol, and get some programs started with our community, because you're not going to be able to back this up with our community if we're not feeling safe. We have found drugs on the premises of our elementary school. We have more than 3 after schools within less than a mile of walking distance. It's been a nightmare. People at River Ridge who own businesses, neighborhoods, everyone around us that I know have been broken into. There's needle trash, yada, yada, yada. And the thing we keep hearing is, oh, we don't know if it's this resident or that. Well, they don't allow people to get high on the premises or drink. So guess where they're doing it? In our neighborhood, and they're walking around. So listen to this, Mr. Todd. We called a school on Vine Street and asked them if Step Up on Vine has ever contacted them or if they have trouble with homelessness. One of the 2 schools said they've never heard of you, and the other did too. And also that they have a homeless issue in their back alley and it's not being addressed. So they don't know if it's the people in your program, but it seems like an issue. Thank you.
Well, certainly to the latter comments, I'll say, I'm not sure who you spoke with at the school, but I spoke with the principal of the Vine, the Early Education Center, the preschool, probably 3 weeks ago personally. And she had just very positive things to say. And then I got a voicemail from Miss Chang, who's the principal of the Vine Street Elementary School. And we have a very positive relationship with her. So I'm not sure who you talked to. Maybe some of the line staff who answer the phone aren't really familiar with us, which actually is a good thing, because if there are problems, they would be familiar with us. And the homeless individuals in that area, so obviously they're not our tenants who are there, and our projects are impacted just like you are, with homeless people sleeping on the street and encampments. They're not drawn to our building, but we're in Hollywood. There's a lot of homeless encampments. So the homeless issue is a problem for the school. It's a problem for us too, but it has nothing to do with the housing that we're providing.
Thank you. We have our final caller, Adrian Sigmund. Your line is now open, and this is our final caller for the evening. Just want to let callers know that we're following council rules of decorum, so people aren't allowed to speak twice if they've already spoke tonight. So Adrian, your line is open.
Hi, this is actually Amy Cantrell. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I want to join multiple callers in being deeply grieved at how our friends on the street, particularly that were in the encampment that was shut down today, are treated right now. And so I'm deeply for permanent supportive housing, but it also matters how we're treating people right now in the meantime. My biggest question is, I understand that Shangri-La is a for-profit developer, and so I want to understand more about that and have some transparency around that in terms of how much profit are they actually making in these conversions and with this particular conversion, because I often see for-profit developers being engaged in housing. And I don't see a lot on the ground in terms of the benefits sometimes to our community in relationship to the output of profit. because people continue to flounder in poverty. And we've heard a lot of callers talking about our community members living in poverty, whether they're on the streets or their elders living in poverty. We have an extreme poverty rate in terms of so many of our community members who aren't thriving and are living paycheck to paycheck or less. And so I'm really
Maybe we lost that caller, but I'd be happy to answer that. So you're absolutely right about developers making money, and it really is offensive to me in the development community, which is why we've tried to disrupt the way things are normally done and looking for innovative models. In the traditional development that you're talking about with developers making money, when you go the traditional path, there's millions of dollars in developers fees that flow to the developer, and they make money at the front end, in the middle, and the conclusion of the project. And of course, they have to make money to underwrite their costs, but this is an entirely different model where Shangri-La is bringing their own capital. They're bringing $9 million for the acquisition, plus probably another couple million for rehab and other costs. So they're bringing $11 million of their own capital into it. So since there's no government financing of the development, there's no developers fees. They're earning zero developers fees on this. What they're doing is taking a really big risk by investing their own money in a solution for Asheville. And are they going to make money on the rents? Yes, of course. We want them to make money on the rents. We don't want them to lose money. But I can tell you that I know that across all the motel projects, and I expect this will be true of the Asheville project, it'll be a single-digit return on their investment. They're going to have to repay the $11 million because that's what they're financing that with their own credit and resources. So they're going to have some interest and carrying costs on that. But with the rents we collect and to pay for all the utilities and all the operating expenses, at the end of the day, they'll have a single-digit return on that investment. And we want them, it's not going to be exorbitant. I can guarantee you, these are not highly profitable enterprises anywhere. So I certainly sympathize, and I'm nauseated by the traditional housing development system in which developers, particularly private developers, benefit hugely at the expense of homeless individuals. I mean, I've sat in closing calls on some of these projects, and there's 20 attorneys representing all the parties. Everybody's making money on the deal off the backs of homeless individuals. So that's why we really are talking about doing a innovative model that's going to be much less expensive and get the units on quickly so homeless people can move in and get off the street. I'll get off my soapbox.
So thank you for that. And Amy, we apologize. The public input line was inadvertently muted there for the remainder of your comments, but I hope Todd's response was helpful in understanding what they're hoping to accomplish here. So it is 6 p.m. and we wanted to ensure that we ended on time and was aware of everyone's time here tonight. So we just want to thank you. Please note that next steps for the city of Asheville is to have this item come before our city council members on Tuesday night for a formal vote regarding the potential funding for Step Up to administer services related to this permanent supportive housing use, as well as to extend our existing contracts for the people who are in shelter now till the end of March. And we will look forward to having this dialogue with council on Tuesday night. But again, we appreciate everyone taking the time to listen in, to provide thoughtful questions, and for us to have an ability to share this information with the public. So again, thank you for your time, and appreciate you. Good night.